Despite this year turning out, well, utterly horrible for most people, there's still been a lot going on in the electronic drum world. Today I'm going to recap this year in eDrums, I'm going to focus in a little bit on some of the products that I didn't have a chance to do full videos on, and generally just sum up where I think electronic drums are going to be going into 2021. Let's get to it. We've seen product releases both from major electronic drum brands and newer or smaller ones. We've seen the unfortunate demise of one company's US distribution division and the return of an old friend. So I felt that it was appropriate to have a look at where we've ended up since NAMM all the way back at the beginning of the year, only a couple of months into my channel where I claimed it's probably the most exciting time to be an eDrummer. Was it? Well, that all depends on where you think the eDrums should be heading and what you think they should be trying to achieve. If your main goal of using electronic drums is to try and replicate an acoustic drum kit at home, or to have interchangeable acoustic style sounds but with volume control, then this year's been a very good year for you. As you're likely well aware, this year's seen quite a large turning point in direction for Roland. The V-Drums Acoustic Design, or VAD kits. These were made to appeal to those who want a solid acoustic-alike electronic kit for both practice and live use, and they appear to be selling pretty well from what I've seen amongst the community. Larger pads to mimic acoustic sizes, larger shells to mimic the acoustic aesthetic. These aren't new ideas, and they're things that many people have been after or have been using for years, but now the current biggest player in the market are catering to those drummers but with the solid reputation to back it all up. I've got other videos on my channel where I go into both these kits and just the concept of acoustic like eDrums, so I'll link to those below if you're interested. Alongside the VAD kits came the Roland TD27 module and the TD27KV kit. Personally, I think this is a great module and I've thoroughly enjoyed using it so far. My full thoughts on it will be in a future video. The TD27KV kit itself showed that Roland are still putting plenty of stock in their V-Drums range of smaller pad kits for those that want them, and then towards the end of the year, Roland came out with their TD07KV kit. I've done both a deep dive first impressions video and a full review video on that kit, so I won't go into any depth here, but it's a pretty capable offering for the entry level of the market, and it gives you a lot more sound shaping options than I would have expected for a kit of its level. There's definitely some downsides to the kit in my opinion, but overall I concluded that this is one of the better entry level options in its price range, so check out those videos if you want to know more. There was also another couple of Roland product releases this year, but I'm going to touch on those a bit later on. We finally saw the release of the GEWA G9 kits this year. They started shipping in Europe around the end of April, beginning of May. In-depth demos of these kits are still a little bit thin on the ground, especially from actual real-world users. Unfortunately, I've not had any chance to try the kit out myself, so it's a little bit hard to pitch exactly what I think about this kit. Most of the independent user demos are either short playing examples or drum covers, and the bulk of the other videos are promo videos or store reviews. The review video on the Toman YouTube channel is pretty comprehensive, so that's been my main source of information and sound examples, though of course it doesn't really dig into the nitty-gritty of any of the limitations or negative points which is to be expected from a store review. One takeaway from that Toman video though is that this kit can sound a lot better than some of the earlier demos that we heard. It still feels like there's some limitation on sample layers depending on the drums that you're listening to. Some of them seem to handle the ghost note territory better than others, and some exhibit a bit more in the way of machine gunning. The full built-in sample library is contained in a 2GB memory partition from what I've read, so that does suggest that the sample pool isn't all that detailed compared to something like the Mimic Pro or a full-blown VST. I do like the general layout and workflow of the module, and I'm a fan of the touchscreen with the additional dial buttons, though you do only really know for sure how well that setup works when you get something like this in your hands. Making a semi-educated guess, it feels like this is the kind of module that will be able to do produced sounds very well. Kits that sit very well in a mix with music, and it could probably do stylized sounds very well too, but maybe can't quite pull off that acoustic replica level of authenticity in terms of dynamics and the depth of the sample pool compared to the Mimic Pro or drum software. But the only real way to make an informed conclusion on something like this would be to try the module out myself, so GEWA, if you want somebody to do a deep dive, Hit me up. We've also seen more of the F-Note kits this year, which is another company following the acoustic style eDrums ethos. This is a company made up of ex-ATV staff, and when the initial announcement of these kits happened earlier in the year, that much was pretty obvious due to the trigger setup and the cymbals. I'm still not really that clear on exactly when these kits are coming out in the UK, Europe or the US. There have been various demos of both the F-Note 3 and F-Note 5 kits on the Artesia Pro YouTube channel, and a few demos and reviews of the F-Note 3 on non-English YouTube channels. The F-Note 5 is the kit that I'm personally more interested in at the moment because that's closer to the traditional acoustic sizes, though there was also supposed to be an F-Note 7 kit with a 20-inch ride cymbal. This was one of the highlights coming out of NAMM, but it seems to have disappeared off their website at the moment. The F-Note 5 is going for that bop kit aesthetic, and if you want my initial thoughts on the sizes and configurations, go check out the NAMM video that I did because I'm going to focus more on what we've seen since then. From what I've seen on the videos, the module that they're supplying with the F-Note 3 and 5 are pretty much the same, just tweaked a little bit for the setup across each configuration. I'm not really sure if there's any major feature differences between the two. There's been a lot more sound demos now with the new videos coming out, and they've definitely gone the ATV style direction with the sounds. They're very dry, small room, close mic'd kind of sounds, though they have also included reverb in there and the ability to tune and layer instruments. And those are the kind of functionality improvements that I would have liked to have seen inside an ATV module. I think that this will give the F-Note kits a lot more flexibility than the ATV kits could ever achieve. Of course, that's not going to be on the same level as a Roland module or even the Pearl Mimic Pro, but definitely a lot more scope than the what you see is what you get approach that ATV took. The sampling depth still feels a little bit low. When listening to the rolls and faster playing on the demos, you'll hear what sounds like repetition and a somewhat machine gunish quality. There's a chance that some of this could be in the setup, but I do get the impression from what I've heard that it's likely to be to do with the samples. Another slight limitation even compared to ATV's modules is that it seems like it's a closed off module. There's no ability to load new instruments or your own samples after the fact. But that said, that is me looking for faults, and it's another kit that I would really love to sit down and play myself to get a proper impression of. The AD5 was very popular with a certain subsection of eDrummers, and I reckon this one could probably fit that bill very well, especially since it offers more flexibility than ATV does. Speaking of ATV, they've not had the best of years, unfortunately. There had been some clues that maybe things weren't going quite as smoothly as they'd hoped towards the end of 2019, especially the beginning of 2020, and there was a change of focus towards the lower end, smaller pad kits, and I also believe that they got hit really hard with the US tariffs. Once multiple countries went into lockdown earlier on this year, it looks like that was pretty much the finishing blow for the US arm of the company, and ATV USA filed for bankruptcy in October. This is a real shame because ATV appeared to be a really solid contender in the eDrum world when they first came out. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. ATV Europe and Japan are still continuing on, and anybody that owns ATV products in the US can still get their warranty claims dealt with by ATV Japan. From what I can gather though, it looks very likely that most of the previously planned products like the ATV Link and the higher range kits are gone. This year we're supposed to see the release of 20 new Canopus sounds on the ATV Sound Store, but only 3 of these ended up releasing, I believe. It must be a pretty big blow overall to lose the US market, and I get the feeling that ATV are going to be a much smaller player going forward. The electronic drum community suffered another unfortunate loss this year, with the passing of Jerry Langenfeld, also known as Jman, back in May. Many of you will know him from being very active online in the community, and from running Stealth Drums, where he supplied various triggers, electronic drums and cymbal builds. At the time, I didn't really feel like it was my place to comment on his passing, as I've never personally interacted with Jerry, and many of you will have known him personally or at least known of him for a very long time. But I felt like I couldn't genuinely round up this year without at least expressing what a deeply sad loss this has been for the electronic drum world. The DIY side of it in particular, due to his huge contribution to it over the years. He brought a lot of experience, advice and friendship to the community and is sorely missed. Moving on to another long-time mainstay of the electronic drum world, Yamaha have returned to the electronic drum arena after a very quiet period of mostly repackaged old modules and kits. To be honest, for a while it looked like they might have been backing out, but they're clearly aiming to establish that they mean business once again and have brought out a new line of low to mid-range kits in the form of the DTX 6K line. I recently delved into my own thoughts on this seemingly mixed bag affair, and the general takeaway for me is that I'm not huge on the kit itself. It looks a bit dated up against most of the competition in its price range with the rubber rubber pad setups. On the other hand, the module looks and sounds very promising, especially because of its price range. After some manual delving and examining the demos, it's one of the better sounding modules of its ilk in my opinion, and the features are pretty extensive too. It looks like they're firmly intending on this to be aimed at those who need compact setups. Many of us in the West forget that not every single region of the world wants larger pad kits or has space for them. I would also be very surprised if Yamaha stopped here. My guess is as good as anybody's when it comes to Yamaha's overall strategy, but it seems pretty unlikely to me that they would only hit the mid-range and then leave it at that. I've got a suspicion that like many other Japanese companies this year, they've been hit very hard with what's happened throughout the world, and if there is anything else in the works, there's always a chance that progress has been dented somewhat. I'm very interested in seeing what anything else Yamaha could come out with would be capable of, so I'll be watching with enthusiasm.
I'm just so enthusiastic, as you can tell.
So that's most of the bigger releases covered, but there have been plenty of smaller releases that are worth a mention. I won't go into too much depth on this next one because I covered the entire roller coaster in 3 videos while I was trying to work out what was going on, but this year saw the release of a new multipad, or should I say a bunch of new multipads. It's appeared under many brandings: the dbdrums nPad, the Gear4Music DD90 Digipad, the HXW Avatar PD705, the Ashley DME 705, and probably some others too. I lose track. I eventually got hold of the Gear4Music version, and unfortunately, as I covered in a 4th video, I had some issues with both of the units that I tried out and I ended up having to send them back for a refund. This was a real shame because I really wanted to see this turn out to be a decent low-cost solution. I never expected it to be perfect for the price range or to fully rival something like the SPD-SX or the Alesis Strike Multipad, but unfortunately the problems that I personally had with it made it pretty much unusable on a general level. There was also the release of the eDrUMin 10 this year, following on from the 4-input original eDrUMin that came out in 2019. I've not covered this before on my channel because I've not had a chance to try one out yet, but this is a trigger interface with either 10 or 4 inputs that can be used in a couple of ways. The usage that I see talked about most is that it can be hooked up to a computer to allow the triggering of software drums, VSTs, etc. without the need for a traditional drum module. The beauty of it is how versatile the triggering software is. It's compatible with both Roland and Yamaha pads in full functionality, and from user reports, pretty much every pad you could throw at it bar the Roland digital pads. It also has some pretty great features that you won't find elsewhere, such as the ability to use 3 zones on a Roland cymbal with only 1 cable using the bell sense function. There's also the ability to create a 2-zone pad out of what would normally be a single zone pad, or split an input into 2 pads and still get 2 zones from them. There's positional sensing with center mounted piezo pads, and a hotspot suppression feature which reportedly works very well. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's some other things that I'm missing since I haven't used one, so apologies if I've missed anything. It can also be used without a computer, hooking it up to another eDrum module to use pads on it that aren't normally compatible with that module. So for example, if you've got a Yamaha ride cymbal and you've got a Roland module, you can normally only get 2 zones out of it on that Roland module. So instead you could plug that cymbal into the eDrUMin to get all 3 zones and then send the MIDI data to the Roland module. It can also allow you to expand your module with extra sounds over MIDI if your module supports it. This is a tricky topic because a lot of modules nowadays don't support additional sounds being triggered over MIDI. They'll only trigger as many sounds as can be assigned to the zones on each pad. I tried to cover this topic the best that I could in a previous video, how MIDI works with electronic drums, and I'll leave a link to that video below if you want more information. Either way, the eDrUMin looks like a great little device. Another handy little device popped up on the scene this year, the Smart WAV 2. I actually do have one of these, 2 in fact, of the Smart WAV 2 and MIDI adapter models that were kindly sent to me by Visic Technologies. Essentially, it's a simple little device that can play back samples, and the MIDI version can trigger them via MIDI notes sent by your module or a computer or whatever other MIDI device you've got. It can trigger up to 4 samples per MIDI note, allowing you to use 4 velocity levels. So it's a really promising device for adding some samples to your kit, but with a bit more dynamic variation than you're going to get out of a Roland module with its one-shot sample imports and only up to 2 layers. It triggers these directly from an SD card, and you don't need any fancy software to load anything. It's basically drag and drop along with sorting out your file names and directories, with some simple text file instructions that you can use to change the behavior of the sample triggering. The level of overall variation that you get from 4 sample layers isn't going to blow anybody's minds, but it's not been made to rival the playability of a VST or something like the 2-box or Mimic modules. It's a cheap and compact device that's been designed to give you some more flexibility and allow you to use samples samples with modules that might not even support them themselves. Unfortunately, despite having these for probably over a month now, I've not really had a great deal of time to actually spend trying this product out. So stay tuned for a video on this product down the line when I can actually give it the time that it deserves. There were two other products that Roland came out with this year that I haven't really talked about on my channel yet because, to be honest, I didn't have a great deal to say about them. The Roland TD27K kit and the SPD-20 Pro percussion pad. The TD27K kit was a bit of a surprise when it cropped up because it didn't really get any fanfare from Roland, it just sort of appeared. And it's a setup with the TD27 module that doesn't come with the digital pads, which, to be honest, is one of the TD27's main selling points. This is very similar to the previous TD25K kit, just with bigger rack toms, an extra cymbal, and the newer kick and hi-hat pads. It's a bit of an odd choice, to be honest. Roland really seemed to have been trying to fill every single price bracket on the market, so to some degree I can see a logic behind it, but it's also a little bit of an underwhelming kit and doesn't really seem all that necessary. It also occupies the same price point as the VAD306 kit. Admittedly, that kit comes with a TD17 module, but it's also a more appealing all-round package in my opinion due to the aesthetics of the shells, the kick pad and the hardware, along with the larger snare and tom pads that have the newer triggers and no hotspotting. It seems that Roland really are keeping the sort of traditional eDrums pad setups and the VAD line separate from each other. Maybe for you this is the perfect kit, but I'd personally struggle to recommend it over other things in the same price range or only a few hundred more. The SPD-20 Pro is another interesting one. It's an updated version of one of the older Octapad models, the SPD-20, and from what I can tell it's got some new additional features, and on top of all the original SPD-20 sound it's also got some new sounds, some of which are apparently acoustic sounds from the TD27, so that's definitely an update. Looking at the product page on Roland's website and the manual for the old SPD-20, I think that the effects processor has also been updated to allow a full suite of multi-effects, rather than the 4 predetermined effects on the older model. We've had the SPD-30 Octapad for over a decade now. I believe it came out in 2010, and that was the successor to the SPD-20, so you'd be forgiven for thinking this was pretty weird. From what I can tell, it's more to do with how popular the SPD-20 was in particular markets. So in terms of a sort of legacy product, it kind of makes sense to do an updated version of the most popular one. It's interesting that it exists, but it won't really change the game for a lot of people. So this year's seen a rather large focus on electronic drums that somewhat emulate acoustic drums, whether that's purely cosmetics, whether that's the sound, or whether that's the feel. And I get the feeling that this will be the general trend of the market for the next few years, and especially going into 2021. More and more people are coming around to the idea of using electronic drums for home practice and even for gigs. But that does mean that the focus on electronic drums as their own instrument seems to be diminishing. The popularity of the Roland VAD kits can't be ignored, and the design choices from most companies at the moment, Yamaha's new kits notwithstanding, seem to generally reflect that. I personally think that the strengths of both of these uses of electronic drums, but what do you think about the future of electronic drums going into 2021? And have I missed any obvious products or events in the eDrum world from this year? There's been quite a lot to keep track of, so there's every chance that I've missed some things out. If you enjoyed this video, consider popping a like on it and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss my final video of the year, why you should use eDrums in 2021. Have a great holiday period, enjoy yourselves, you deserve it, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!